Hello, everyone. This is the Daily Fantasy 5 for Wednesday, April 24th, and this is episode 64. As always, we are brought to you by mathradio.com, where you can pick up an online math course for your kids ages 7 through 17 for as little as $9.99. Go to mathradio.com today. All right, big show today. We're going to start off with a huge NFL trade that has all kinds of ramifications for the draft and the season and fantasy. And then we have a baseball injury. We've got a couple injuries in the NBA to talk about from last night, and then we'll talk about the games that are going on tonight. And we'll finish the show with an extra segment on 5 players who are going to have the biggest impact from this draft in fantasy football for the 2019-20 season. All right, so let's get started with the NFL trade. This was a big one. We were talking about Frank Clark. He finally got traded from Seattle. He goes to the Kansas City Chiefs. This move makes no sense to me at all. First, let me break down the move, and then we'll talk about the fantasy implications. So, Frank Clark gets traded from Seattle to Kansas City for their first-round pick. So, Seattle gets pick number 29 in this draft. They swap third-round picks, and then Seattle also gets a second-round pick next season. So that's a pick swap and a first-rounder and a second-rounder. I think that's a huge haul for Frank Clark. I mean, I didn't think they'd actually get a first round for her, and they only got a first. They got a first, a second, and a pick swap in the third round. That is crazy pants. All right. Not only that, but Kansas City had to pay Frank Clark 5 years, $105 million, with $63 million guaranteed. Now, how does this make sense for the Kansas City Chiefs? All right. First of all, I agree. Okay. Frank Clark is probably a better player than Dee Ford. All right, I'm not questioning that. He's 3 years younger. Frank Clark is only 25, whereas Dee Ford is 28. So that makes a difference, right? And he's a little bit better. He has better production, and maybe he's just a better leader. I don't know. There were character questions about him. I don't know the guy personally, so I can't speak to that. But let's just say I agree that Frank Clark is a better football player. However, the San Francisco 49ers only paid Dee Ford a guaranteed $33 million. 5 years, $85 million. So that's $20 million less overall, $30 million less in the guarantees, right? And Kansas City had to give up a first rounder, a second rounder next year, and swap thirds. Why not just keep Dee Ford? It makes no sense, people. Just keep Dee Ford. What are you thinking about? So you get a little bit better, right? But you have to pay more. You give up a first rounder. You could have found an edge help. You could have found defensive line help in the first round. There's great players. This is the deepest edge draft like in the history of drafts. Okay, I'm a little bit upset about this. I am glad I'm not a Kansas City Chiefs fan, or I would be very upset about this whole thing. I think Seattle did a great job with this. However, let's talk about the fantasy implications, okay? Seattle's defense is going to stink, right? They lost Sherman last year. They lost a couple players this year. I think Wagner's gone. They lost somebody else too. We went to the Ravens. I can't remember who it was. And now they're losing Frank Clark. I mean, it's unbelievable. This defense is not going to be any good, which is great news for Russell Wilson. They gave him all the money. Now you've got to set Russell Wilson free, right? Russell Wilson, I believe, is going to move up my fantasy quarterback rankings. I think I had him at number 6 or 7. He might move into the top 5 for me now with this news because they're going to need to catch up in every game they play this year, I think. I mean, it's unbelievable. I can't believe this. Also, for the Kansas City Chiefs, this hurts their offense a little bit because their defense will be a little bit better. Now, I don't think he makes all the difference in the world, but it certainly can't hurt. They might not be in as many shootouts this year as they were last year. See, I loved it. They got rid of all their defensive players. They got rid of Barry, Houston, Ford. I thought they were just going to be an absolute dumpster fire on defense, which would help all the offensive players. But now they might be a little bit better, but they have no draft capital anymore. I don't know. I guess it slightly diminishes the value of the Kansas City offensive players, but I love Russell Wilson now because of this trade. Okay. I've talked about that for way too long. This show is going to be like our longest ever. Let's move on and talk about the injury in the world of baseball in Cleveland. The Indians starting pitcher Carrasco, he is left the game with a knee injury. He's going to have an MRI, I believe, today or tomorrow. He had been pitching. I don't know. He had an interesting year going so far. 33 strikeouts in 21 innings, which is fantastic. However, he has a 6.0 ERA with a 1.52 WHIP. So you got to take the good with the bad. Maybe you were using him as a streamer. He certainly gets you a lot of strikeouts. So if you needed a source of strikeouts, he is no longer available for you. All right, let's move on from the Indians and baseball. We're going to talk about the two basketball injuries that happened last night. So Enos Cancer, the Portland Trailblazers, he separated his shoulder in the first quarter. Ouch, right? He was able to pop it back in and continue to play. I did not think Cancer was that tough. I guess I was wrong about him. The question is, will he be anywhere close to 100% for the Nuggets series if the Nuggets advance? They still have to win one more game. Hopefully for them, the Spurs win Game 6, and that forces a Game 7 to wear out the Nuggets before Portland has to play them. And the question is, how will he handle Jokic? I think he can do just fine against anybody on San Antonio. I mean, he's not going to be matched up with Aldridge, so it shouldn't really matter. And I don't know. I think he can handle himself with Jokic a little bit, maybe. Yeah, probably not. But anyway, that's the news on Cancer. But as long as he's on the floor, he's a great fantasy player because he produces offensive numbers. He just can't play defense. That's all. Okay. Our fourth story is another injury. This time in Toronto, Lowry injured his finger in the clincher last night. So his finger popped out of socket and then he popped it back in. He left the game. After the game, he was wearing a splint on his finger. He says he's going to be ready to go for Game 1 of the next series with Philadelphia. I mean, we'll have to wait and see. I had the same injury on my pinky finger when I was in high school playing basketball, and I actually missed a few games, but I'm not nearly as tough or not nearly as the athlete as Kyle Lowry is. So let's pay attention to that. They don't really need Kyle Lowry that much against the Philadelphia 76ers. They don't really have a point guard they rely on. So I don't think it's that big of a deal either way. All right, let's move on to the basketball games tonight. We have Utah at the Houston Rockets. Houston are an 8-point favorite. And then we have the Los Angeles Clippers at the Golden State Warriors, where the home team Warriors are a 14-point favorite. So yesterday I gave out a 3-team parlay at 2-1 odds. That one hit with Philadelphia, Denver, and Portland winning. Thank you, Damian Lillard. I appreciated that. So tonight I'm going to go a little bit different. That was kind of like a sure thing, or at least I was betting on the favorites. Tonight, I don't think there's any value with betting on Houston and Golden State. I can see one of them losing and getting this thing prolonged, making it a little bit more interesting, even though it's not really interesting. It just seems that way. So Jazz are a 3-1 underdog, so that's plus 300. And the Los Angeles Clippers are a 10-1 underdog, plus 1,000. So what I'm going to do is put a small number on both, maybe one unit on the Jazz and the Clippers. All right, give me one on each one separately. If you hit either of them, you're making money. So let's just say, for example, you put $100 on each. If the Jazz win, all right, you get $300 back plus your bet, so you're up $200. If the Clippers win, right, you're up, and the Jazz lose, you're up $900? Not bad, right? So all you need is one of those teams to win. You don't need both. The parlay would be astronomical, and there's no way it's going to happen. So that would be my recommendation for tonight. It might not happen, but I kind of like it. All right. Let's get to our special segment today where we're talking NFL draft, and we're talking about the 5 prospects who are going to have the biggest fantasy impact next season. Okay, let's start with number 5. Here I have Kyler Murray. I don't really think he's going to be a top 20 quarterback. However, I would draft him like he was. Okay, because here's the deal. The guy could come out and be absolute gangbusters because he can run, he can pass, he can do it all, but he's going to be on a pretty bad Arizona Cardinals team most likely. Now, if he's not drafted by the Cardinals, if he goes to someone like the Giants or the Bengals, they have a starter in front of him, and he might have to sit out at least a few games, 4 or 5 games next season, and that would be no good at all for him. So if he goes to Arizona, I would go ahead and draft him as your backup quarterback, right? Because you could catch lightning in a bottle, and if it doesn't happen, you simply drop him and go with somebody else. Now, I would not overdraft him, but he would be my number 5 impact player from this draft. Okay, let's go to number 4. I like Oklahoma, Marquise Hollywood Brown. All right, my second Oklahoma player in this draft little segment here. So I believe Hollywood Brown, has the biggest upside and downside range of all the wide receivers in this draft. All right, because here's the problem. He's injured and he's small. He's only 5'9", weighs 166 pounds, but he's like Tyreek Hill out on the field. The guy is lightning fast. He can make cuts. He's a more polished wide receiver than DK Metcalf or the other Brown. I think it was AJ Brown, right? So I love this guy. And it's not like you have to draft him in the first few rounds. Like, let's say you take a flyer in the 7th, 8th round on this guy. He could be gangbusters for you. You never know. I would go ahead and take Marquise Brown, Hollywood Brown, as my number 1 wide receiver for fantasy out of this class. All right, let's move on to number 3. All right, this guy I absolutely love. His name is Darrell Henderson. He's a running back out of Memphis. All right, listen to all these stats. First of all, he's 5'8", 208 pounds. All right, the guy looks like he looks like a bowling ball. Or he doesn't look like he's fast, but he ran a 4.4940, which is not bad at all. He's fast, he's big, he's strong. Last season at Memphis, he had 8 games of over 150 yards. He had 22 rushing touchdowns, 3 receiving touchdowns. He averaged 8.9 yards a carry, and he had 43 carries of 15-plus yards. The guy is a home run hitter who should have an instant impact in the NFL. Now, obviously, it depends where the guy gets drafted. But I think no matter where he gets drafted, he can at least be a change of pace back and make a huge fantasy impact in year number 1. If he gets drafted as the feature back, the sky is the limit for this guy. He could finish as a top 10 fantasy running back this season. All right. Rookie running backs come in and make an impact right away. So write down this name, Darrell Henderson, and depending on his situation, he could be a top 10 running back this year in fantasy football. Okay. Number 2 on my list is pretty obvious, TJ Hawkinson. All right, from Iowa State. He's a tight end. He's my number 1 tight end. I think he's going to be a top 6 fantasy tight end from day 1, right? Because think about it. There's basically nothing left at the tight end position in the NFL. There's 5 guys who scored over 100 fantasy points last year. You have Kelsey, Kittle, Ertz, Ebron, and Cook. Now, I'm not saying TJ gets into that top 5 group, but he's certainly the 6th best. I mean, let's say he goes to, I don't know, the Packers. Packers trade up to get him, right? He's got to be a top 5 tight end, no doubt about it. The guy has all the skills. He can block. He can run the routes. He can explode for touchdowns. He can do it all, right? So I like TJ Hawkinson as my number 2 player from this draft to make an impact in year 1 in fantasy football. Okay, my number 1 player, most people's number 1 running back in this class is Josh Jacobs, running back from Alabama. I love him as well. He can do it all, okay? He reminds me a lot of Jamal Charles, right? I expect him to come into the league, get 1,000 yards rushing, 600 receiving yards, and although he's not really an every down running back, he never did carry the workload at Alabama. That's just because he has so many great running backs at Alabama. But he's probably the best pass catcher in this class. He can do it all for you, and I just see him being used by whatever team he goes to. Hopefully it's not the Raiders, but whatever team he goes to is going to use this guy, and he's going to have great production out there. So I love Josh Jacobs as my number 1 fantasy prospect for fantasy football coming out of this draft. Would I draft him as a top in the first round? That we're going to have to think about, and we can talk about that on a later show. We've gone long enough for today. That's it. This is the Daily Fantasy 5. We are brought to you by mathradio.com. Go to www.mathradio.com to pick up an online math course for your kids ages 7 through 17 for as little as $9.99. Once again, that is www.mathradio.com. All right, if this is your first time here, please like, subscribe to the channel, tell your friends about it. If you're listening on the podcast, give us a 5-star rating and a review, and we are out. Bye for now.